Welcome back to World History by a Jew. I'm Seth Fleishman, and this is our lecture on Amalek, the great biblical mystery. Who is Amalek? Can we solve this mystery tonight? All right, so some of you may need more of a refresher course than others on who exactly this individual or these people are. So I'm going to start off with one of our little comics to get going this evening. So just a few days after the Jews left Egypt, the Amalekites were a group of people that came and attacked the Israelites. They actually specifically targeted the rear of the columns. So they victimized the weak and the vulnerable. So the Israelite forces turned to face this threat. And Moses tells Joshua, choose some of our men and go out and fight these Amalekites. And Moses then adds, tomorrow I'll go stand on top of the hill overlooking the battle. And so Joshua gathers an army to fight the Amalekites, while Moshe ascends the hill with Aaron, his brother, and Hur, his nephew. So these three are on top of the hill, as you can see in this picture here. And then you have Joshua down below, leading the Israelites here against the Amalekites. So Joshua and his men fight the Amalekites, while Moses and Hur and Aaron are on top of this hill. And as the battle goes on, Moses is lifting up his arms, which is giving more power to the Israelites in a divine sort of way. But after a while, Moses' arms are getting tired, right? Because how long can you put your arms up like this? So he starts lowering his arms, and the Israelites actually weaken. So in order to keep his arms up all the time, you have his brother and his nephew on each side. So Aaron and Hur on each side of Aaron, and they give him a stone to sit on, and then they help him lift up his arms. So his arms are staying up the whole time. And then the Israelites start winning again, and eventually the Israelites prevail. So God then tells Moshe to write this episode on a scroll and make sure Joshua hears it, because Hashem will always be at war against the Amalekites. So then Moshe builds an altar of thanks, and that's the end of our first battle with the Amalekites, but it's not the end of them. So take the Philistines, for example. The Philistines are in the Bible a lot, and we've identified who these people are, but the Amalekites are in there a lot as well, really second only to the Philistines. We don't know who they are. So one of the greatest biblical mysteries is, who exactly are the Amalekites? And that's what we're going to be exploring tonight. So we're going to start off with a quick reminder of our Bronze Age collapse story, because this is the Bronze Age collapse series, and we're building in the Amalekites into the Bronze Age collapse scenario. So very quickly, for those who have not heard it, the late Bronze Age was a high time in human civilization. You had great empires based around the Eastern Mediterranean. You had Egypt, you had the Hittites, you had the Mycenaeans, and you had Mitanni this way. I won't go through all of them tonight, but just that you have this great trade, great international relations. Human civilization had never been so great, and then all of a sudden it just comes to a crash, just completely collapses. So we've talked in detail in the previous lectures about the Bronze Age collapse. There's one specifically that I analyze each of these causes of the Bronze Age collapse. But just know that due to a combination of factors, including droughts, earthquakes, technological changes, overdependence on trade, bad leadership, and then most significantly, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, because all this combines into one, this world in the late Bronze Age, this Eastern Mediterranean world comes to an end. All right, and then we've spent the last couple lectures analyzing this last line here, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, because the invasion of the Sea Peoples is very well reflected in the Bible. Now, the Sea Peoples, as a reminder, they were a confederation of mostly seafaring peoples. We know, thanks to the Egyptians, of 9 distinct groups of people. And the ones crossed out are the ones that I've spoken about in previous lectures. I'm not going to do them all. So the next one we're going to do are the Lukka people. And so I went ahead and highlighted them with little arrows so you'll know they're next on our agenda. The Sea Peoples would wreak havoc all over the Eastern Mediterranean, and we see the Mycenaean fall. We'd see a lot of these islands in the Aegean go down. We'd see Crete, Cyprus, and then Anatolia. Also, multiple sites in Anatolia have been destroyed, but most significantly being the Hittite Empire came to an end. So these people wreaked havoc all over the Eastern Mediterranean, and they're really a combination of pirates and mercenaries and soldiers, and they had their own navy. It just this whole conglomeration of problem causers. All right, now what I'd like to do is hit up our starring people for this chapter of our lectures, and that's the Lukka. So if you look on this table on the bottom left, these are the people I've been going through with you over the last few lectures, or I intend to if I haven't already. Now, the Peliset are the ones we spent the most time on, right? Because those ended up becoming the Philistines. We talked in our last lecture, we talked about the Philistines of the north, so to speak. We learned that those really were the Jeker people and the Sherdana or Sherdan people. So tonight we're looking at the Lukka people. Now in the Egyptian records, we have several occurrences of them. First of all, we see them in an Amarna tablet, which I'll show you again tonight, but I've shown you this slide in a previous lecture. But we see Cyprus talking to Egypt about being invaded by these Lukka people. Then we know the Lukka people pop up again during the Great Battle of Kadesh, when Ramses the Great, Ramses II has a starring role in Battle of Kadesh. The Lukka people are listed as people allied with the Hittites fighting against the Egyptians in this battle. And then when Merneptah rolls around, Merneptah faces off against all these sea people during his reign who are invading Egypt. And one of those people listed are the Lukka. Now, what I want you to see is, even though you've never heard of the Lukka, look how much they're listed. The only one listed more is the Sherdana in the Egyptian records. So these guys occur over and over again in time, even if you haven't heard of them. Now, why do I have this big question mark at the top? Well, that's because, oddly enough, we don't know what the Lukka look like. Even though they're mentioned so many times, there's no image of a guy labeled as a Lukka prisoner or a dead Lukka. Although, so we've had images of most everyone we've talked about. This will be a people we do not have an image, so I just have a big question mark there. So, as I pointed out, the Lukka people, there's numerous references to them. They're seen in Egypt, or talked about by Egyptians. They're seen in the Levant, so the Ugaritic archive talks about Lukka. Byblos temple inscription, which we're going to look at tonight, also talks about the Lukka people. Then we have the Hittites, and the Hittites actually mentioned the most. Why? Because Lukka, if you look at this map, we're going to look at the map closer later, but just very briefly, you can see the Lukka lands are in southwestern Anatolia, and the Hittites, Hattusas here is the capital of the Hittites. So this is the base of the Hittites. So just geography would tell you that the Hittites would deal with the Lukka more than these other areas would. Now, some basic info about Lukka. As I said, they're based in southwest Anatolia. We know they were operating at least going back to 2000 BCE due to an inscription in Byblos. I'm going to show you in 1 second. Their language is not 100% known, but it's widely believed to be a derivative of Luvian, which is really, and I'm going to talk about that more a bit, but Luvian is just the language of Western Anatolia. All right. The Lukka activities as we see them in these above records they are seafaring people. They have pirate tendencies. So we see with Cyprus specifically, they're being attacked like they're being attacked by pirates or Viking raids, maybe a Viking raid. You know, it's like the Cyprus letter is almost like you're reading a monk from Lindisfarne describing the Vikings destroying them in the 800s of the Common Era. We have this similar image here with Cyprus around 1350 BCE. So, and we also know, thanks to the Egyptians, that these guys probably served as mercenaries as well, like with the Battle of Kadesh. Now, the funny thing about them is the Lukkas fight both for and against the Hittites in their records. And we can appreciate this because we also talk about the Sherdana, which are the same way. Remember, the Sherdana fought for the Egyptians and against the Egyptians. So the Lukka people are kind of that same way to the Hittites. They continue. So whereas a lot of people disappear, we know exactly what happened to the Lukka. It makes them stand out a little bit. Even though there's some aspects we don't know about them, we know exactly what happened after the Bronze Age collapse, because Lukka is actually a cognate for Lycia, and Lycia becomes Lycia. Now, Lycia is a very well-known and established area during the Greek Golden Age. So we know what happened to them afterwards, which is interesting because that's like hundreds of years afterwards. We know they became Lycia. So I'm now going to kind of go backwards. I've now summarized all these people, given you that nice layout I usually use as my summary in a lecture, but now I'm going to go backwards and give you all the pieces because the pieces are important for our discussion tonight. So this is that first record of the Lukka that I promised you. This is actually in Byblos. So Byblos is in modern Lebanon. It's very close to Beirut. And we talked about Byblos before in one of my my first couple lectures that I ever did on YouTube. The first two Egyptian lectures, at least one of them, if not both of them, I talked about Kebni. So Kebni and Byblos are the same thing. Byblos is a later name. And what's interesting about Byblos, at least the etymology of it is, it shares the same basis as Bible. Why? Because Byblos is believed to be from the Greeks' way of saying papyrus. You know, as we've learned a lot in our etymology lectures, that letters change out. So going from the Egyptian P to the Greek B, and that gives you Byblos. And of course, that's the same etymology of the Bible, which comes from papyrus. Thanks for the Greeks. That's not what I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk about the temple of the obelisk. Now, this was a temple probably to a Canaanite war god that was found in Byblos. And you have these numerous obelisks with inscriptions on them. There's one in particular, the most famous one, or at least in my mind, the most famous one is this Abishimu obelisk. So like I said, we're going back a long time ago. It may not be 2000 BCE, maybe it's 1800 BCE, but it was a long time ago. And there's an inscription in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and it is dedicated to a king of Byblos, but it's sponsored by a merchant from Lukka. All right, so that's what I want you to see here. This is the transcribed inscription, but it basically says, beloved of Hereshep, which is that war god, and then it's talking about the king of Byblos here, saying, you know, for him to live forever, renew his life, blah, blah, blah. And then it's signed by this Kukun, son of a Lukka man. All right, so Kukun or Kukuni is a known Western Anatolian name, so that fits. So I showed you that the Lukka or Luki are from Western Anatolia, and then he says he's of the Lukka people. That's great. Okay, so I'm now going to jump forward a long time, like maybe 400 years or so, and we're going to look at a slide I showed you. Actually, this slide has come up twice in two previous lectures, so it's making its third appearance to you tonight, and because it's just that useful of a slide. So this is one of the Amarna letters. Now, if you remember, the Amarna letters is this big cache of diplomatic letters that was found in Amarna, or Akhetaten, if you prefer, which was Akhenaten's capital. There's some 400 or so letters that were found, and they give us this unbelievable window into about a 30-year period when Egyptian was at its peak during the New Kingdom, and we have all these countries before the Bronze Age collapse. They're all interacting with each other, and we have this amazing record of it. So we have in our Amarna letter number 38 talking about the Luki men. So it's a letter from the king of Cyprus, and I've alluded to this already a couple times tonight about how they have these Luki men who year by year, so year after year, these people are coming and seizing my villages. So his villages are Cyprus. So these Luki men are raiding again and again, the repeated raiders in these villages. And we know they're the Luki people. They go by the Luki people or Luki men. That's what we learned from this. Now I'm going to jump forward, not that far, maybe 50, 70 years, something like that. And we have Hittite records of the Lukka. Now, we actually have a lot of mentions of the Lukka in Hittite records, but we don't have that many mentions specifically of the Luki people, all right? And I'll explain that in the next slide, but just bear with me on this one. So similar to how we have an archive of Amarna, we also have an archive of Hittite letters. And there's a lot. Not, I wouldn't say it's as useful or as expansive as Amarna, but it's not a bad second. We have this third tablet from a long letter. We don't have the whole letter, but it's a third tablet of a long letter, and it's actually, you can read the details here. This Pyramidradu is a amazing story, but I don't have time to get into it tonight. It's like this adventurer that just wreaks havocs with the Hittites, and you have these records of him, all this chaos that he's causing, but it's a little bit outside the bounds for this lecture. What I want to get to is actually just this one little line. It's talking about the Lukka people appealing to the Hittites. So the Lukka people are approaching the kings to talk to them during the talks between these various countries. And this map gives you an idea that just like we know from the land of Canaan, we have all these different city-states or small provinces. You have the same idea here in Anatolia. It's a whole world we haven't explored at all in our lectures. But to give you a couple tastes, Lukka is in the area of Troy. And Troy was a known entity at that point in time. Here we have the Haliyawa, and again, known country, very close to Miletus, again, a place we would come to know. And of course, here's Hadi, which is the capital of the Hittites. So all this is familiar to fans of history. But now I want to talk about these multiple references in the Hittite records, okay? So the Lukka people have been called the Habiru of Anatolia. And I think those of you who watch my Habiru lecture can really appreciate that. But what it is it's basically the Lukka people occur over and over in Hittite records, but they're hard to nail down exactly who they are and where they are, just like you're dealing with the Habiru people and the Amarna tablets. So we see the word Lukka a lot, but it is most often used in terms of Lukka lands. Okay, so you always see the Hittites dealing with Lukka lands. Rarely are they talking about the Lukka people, and they specify in their records. So they say Lukka lands when they mean Lukka lands, and they usually specify Lukka people when they mean Lukka people. We have been, there's really one scholar in particular, a guy by the name of Trevor Bryce, but the scholars have been able to determine that Lukka primarily were in southwestern Turkey, but some even place them up here. The point is they kind of move around. There is no city called Lukka. It's important. There's no king of Lukka. There's no kingdom of Lukka. It was never a kingdom. And as we saw, Lukka also can switch sides. Normally when they're being referred to, it's in a derogatory tone, like, you know, we're dealing with these freaking Lukka people again. That's kind of the idea you get. So we know they were raiders. They were probably a lower social class. Like I said, it sounds a lot like the Habiru people, right? I want to put together the sources we've discussed so far on Lukka, because I'm about to come to a bit of a conclusion. So we know, you've seen all three of these before, this isn't new. This is our conversation about Cyprus and talking about the Lukka men. And I just gave you the transliteration as well, just for clarity. So now we have in Byblos, and again, and I put both of here because it's Cyprus talking to Egypt. Then in this case, it's in Byblos, so it's in what's now Lebanon, but it's inscription in Egyptian hieroglyphic. So I don't know which one to call it. But again, what do you have? You have this Lukka man. All right. And then finally, we have in Anatolia. This is from the Hittite records. That was from the 2 slides ago. And we've got talking about these Lukka people during these negotiations in Anatolia. Now, what this has in common is over and over again, we see Lukka men or Lukka people. All right. So why is it that these people are always called Lukka people? It's not like the Peliset. You don't say the Peliset people. Right? You don't say the Jeker people. It's with something with Lukka. They always say the Lukka men or the Lukka people. So I was looking at this a little bit closer, and if I changed to the correct letters, because really if you're properly transliterating, and you can kind of see a hint here, it really is Q, not K. Well, if I then take this Lukka people and I want to make it into the equivalent in a Semitic language, I need to get rid of the vowels because Semitic languages, particularly in ancient times, did not have vowels. So that really leaves me an L and a Q. Now then, if I take the L and the Q and change it to Hebrew with our lamed and kof, and then take people, and people in Hebrew is suddenly I start getting a very familiar word. And then suddenly the Lukka people just became Amalek. Why is that? Because which is this word, is people. And then that Lukka, which we see, the LQ is what we see over and over again. This is the Hebrew version of the LQ. And when you combine these, this gives us Amalek. Now, in a Semitic language, for those who are less familiar, you first are going to have your noun, and then you're going to have your description. So that's why it kind of flips. So you have for people, and then Lek. So the people of Amalek. This sounds really out there that I just called the Lukka people Amalek. But by the way, as far as I can tell, no one's ever done this before. So what I want to do is first, is there a record of using etymology to identify the sea people? In fact, not only is there a record of it, it's the original way of identifying the sea people. Why? Well, look, the Peliset in 1846 were already proposed to be the Philistines with no evidence whatsoever other than the fact that the name sounded similar. Shekelesh in 1867 was attached to Sicily. Shardana, and the Jeker, both of them that we discussed in our last lecture, that's the Biblical Deborah lecture, in the 1800s, they already guessed where these people were from. And then even the Lukka, their connection to the Lycians came from 1867, again, just out of pure etymology. There was no other evidence at this point in time. Now we have a little bit of explaining to do. Let me take a look at the map. This map, again, is a map you've seen multiple times when I'm doing these lectures. If you want to see the explanation in detail of this map, that's this Z10 lecture. But I'm not going to go through this map in detail tonight, other than to point out that it's showing you our last few lecture topics. So here's Philistia, where the Philistines were based. In our last lecture, we talked right about the Jeker and the Shardana. We talked about the war against Khazor, and then Gerar, we talked about, that was the biblical Canaan. I talked about Abraham being in Gerar. So I just wanted you to see, this is the map we've been using. It should be somewhat familiar to you, but I've kind of been holding back from you all this time. I've been using this map for a long time, and I've always been holding back because I've always had it zoomed in a little bit. I never zoomed it out all the way. So tonight we're going to zoom it out all the way. Now, I'd like you to look down to the bottom of the map. Now, we learn in the bottom of the map that the Amalekites are right here. So we're going to now focus on this section of the map with the Amalekites. Now, how do I know they're there? Well, that's these quotes right here from the Bible, and they kind of let you zero in where they are. So it says very specifically that the Amalekites dwell in the Negev. So this is where the Negev, where really kind of Philistia and Canaan ends and the Negev begins, is down here. Also, we know, for example, it's listed as that that they attacked Israel on the way up from Egypt. Egypt's like right around here. So this would be the stop on the way to Canaan. And also it tells you that King Saul destroyed the Amalekites on the way to shore, which is close to Egypt. So all of this is kind of like zeroed in, not by me, but by Bible scholars saying this is where the Amalekites are. I want to give you a couple different versions. So this is more, I don't call it the scientific map, but this is more of just your professional map makers and how they design the map. Now I want to get a couple more religious authorities and to see how they map it out. And you'll see that both these biblical scholars with a Christian background have kind of pegged that same type of look to it, right? So here's our Amalekites down here, similar to what you just saw. Here's Philistia, there's Philistia. Now you'll see here in some of these quotes, and I'm kind of blocking it, but it's talking about the Amalekites being beside the Kenites. So you see in this case, we don't know much about the Kenites, but you see in these maps, the Kenites were added to be beside the Amalekites. So I just wanted to zero in that whether you're looking at it more from map makers or from religious authorities, the Amalekites are seen as being in this area in the Negev, just south of Philistia. Okay, take one more look at the map and then I'm going to move on. I now want to find out what we know about the Amalekites from the Bible that can be a hint for us tonight. Okay, so I'm going to run through, I'm not going to tell you the entire story of the Amalekites, but I want to run through a couple key stories. So the first one is the one we talked about tonight, right? That's where the Amalekites attacked the Jews right after they crossed the Sea of Reeds. So the Exodus is really just underway, and they violently attack the Israelites from behind. And why did the Amalekites attack the Jews? Well, the Talmud tells us that the Amalekites happened upon the Jews. So this sounds like a roving band of marauders, right? This isn't some grand strategic plan. I want you to make a mental note of this because we're going to come back to it later in the lecture. But now we're going to flash forward and we're going to be operating under King Saul. And King Saul is ordered to attack the Amalekites because of what happened in here, because of Exodus 17. And King Saul tells the Kenites, I showed you the Kenites in the map, tells the Kenites to get out of the way, basically, which again matches what we know about their location. And then he attacks the Amalekites, and he's been ordered to spare no one, but Saul ends up sparing the Amalekite king Agag. This kind of is the hint that King Saul is not really fit to be king because he doesn't follow the instructions to kill them all. He lets the Amalekite king live. David's now in the picture. The Amalekites burn Ziklag. Ziklag is right in the border there between the Negev and that, like where the Philistia and Canaan come together with the Negev. That's where Ziklag is. So anyway, we're told the Amalekites, these great raiders, again raid Ziklag, and King David takes an army of 600 men to hunt down the Amalekites. He attacks them and defeats them shortly before dawn. Kills all these raiders, recovers the stolen goods, and brings them back. All right. Now, after these days and of course, David is going to become king after this. It's another story. So what happened after King David? So we know that the Amalekites are kind of disappeared after Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, conquers the area around 600 BCE. And the Talmud, now the Talmud I mentioned a couple times in the next 2 slides, I think. While the holy text of Judaism is the Torah and really the Tanakh, the Talmud is more like the theology and the laws of Judaism all laid out into a series of documents. And that's what the basis of Judaism is today, is what's laid out in the Talmud. So the Talmud has a lot of lessons for us, but it's the best I can do on finding out what happened to the Amalekites after this period of time. And we're told that the Assyrians, after they conquered the area, they were known for dispersing the native populations and putting other populations in their place. The Amalekites, we're told, were part of this dispersal, and they just mixed in general with the nations in Assyria. Although Amalekites still did live, there is no group of Amalekites hanging out together anymore. Now, our most famous Amalekite is actually Haman. Haman, we're told, is a descendant of the king Agag of the Amalekites. So this king that was spared by King Saul would have children. Then Haman would become the vizier of the Persian Empire and try to talk the king of Persia into allowing him to kill all the Jews. And of course, Queen Esther and her cousin Mordecai saved the day, and all the Jews are spared. And we celebrate this as the holiday of Purim. One more story about the Amalekites. This is much more modern times. In 1898, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II visits Jerusalem. This is true. So he's visiting Jerusalem. They're making this big deal out of it, right? At this time, in this point in history, 1898, it was a big deal to have the German emperor coming to visit. And he's a highly respected rabbi he was supposed to meet in the old city of Jerusalem was a Rabbi Sonnenfeld. So you got to understand with Kaiser Wilhelm, he is arguably the man most responsible for World War I. But this is 16 years before World War I. Right, so you can't convict him for something he hasn't done. But without World War I and without this Kaiser's militancy, there probably was no World War II, right? We had to have World War I to have World War II. To have the Holocaust, we had World War II. So the road that this man is leading Europe down is a very, very bad road. Well, he hadn't done any of this yet, but the Rabbi Sonnenfeld refuses to meet with Kaiser Willy. Why won't he meet with Kaiser Willy? Well, Rabbi Sonnenfeld answered. He said that Vili showed signs of Amalek. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a little bit more to the story. See, the Talmud, again, here's the Talmud, I told you it was going to come again tonight, says the descendants of the Amalekites still exist. Maybe not as a united nation, but they still exist. And they're now known as a nation called Germania, which is just has this great connection, right, to Germania. Anyway, maybe you think it's speculative, but it was too good of a story for me not to use tonight. So anyway, we now know the Amalekites. We now know the Lukka people. What I want to do is see if we can find any commonality between them in the archaeological record. All right, so let's go back to our summary slide of the Lukka people. I told you I was starting with their summary slide before I was going into the details. It's not exactly true because I have gone through now with these references. But the next step after these ancient references is to talk about the language. So that's going to be our next slide. So the Lukka language, as I mentioned at the very beginning, was almost certainly some form of Luvian. Luvian is an Indo-European language of which Spanish and English and German are all considered Indo-European, but they're in a separate branch. Okay. Luvian was on the same branch of the Anatolian languages as the Hittite language. Both are extinct. Okay, so no one's speaking Hittite, no one's speaking Luvian anymore. There are several different scripts for writing Luvian. The one we're dealing with tonight is the Lycian Linear A script, and I have an image of it here to give you an idea of what it looks like. It's a undeciphered hieroglyphic script. It's mainly on Crete. It's in Western Anatolia, of course. It's in the Aegean Islands, and it's also going to be found on mainland Greece and Egypt. These two, not as much, but it does exist. And then finally, it's found in Israel. Okay, so I think what we need to do is look and see where in Israel has this script been found. Okay, so the first place it's been found is at Tel Haror. Now, Tel Haror has a special connection to us because we talked about it as Gerar last time. Now, it's not 100% Tel Haror, which is the archaeological site, is the same as Gerar, but the general consensus is by scholars is they're one and the same. So this is that place where Abraham was talking to that king that was in our last lecture, who was identified, or 2 lectures ago, who was identified as being a Philistine king. And I don't want to, that's open up a whole nother can of worms, but I just want to remind you, we spoke about that city before. Now, there is a potsherd, a single piece of a pithos. What's a pithos? It's this big storage jar. There's a single piece of a pithos all by itself, and it has writing on it. Now that's going to sound a little bit odd, but you have to remember that there was no Post-it notes in the ancient world. So a lot of times you would just use a broken piece of pottery as your scrap piece of paper. So that's probably how it ended up by itself. It has writing on it that is the same Luvian hieroglyphic script. They think it seems to be maybe a more primitive version of it, but they think it's the same script. They being the like 4 Luvian scholars in the entire world. Okay, but I don't have anyone else to ask, and they think it's Luvian, so we're gonna go with that. All right. Now the dating is problematic. Obviously, 1700 to 1500 doesn't really help our story too much. But there is another piece. There's 2. I told you there were 2. The second one is here in Lachish. So on Lachish, it's a piece of a limestone bowl. And that bowl has been dated to 1200 to 1100 BCE, which completely targets the exact range we're looking at for what does Canaan look like after the Bronze Age collapse. So the Bronze Age collapse was around 1175 to 1180 BCE. It's very helpful to find something that dates to that time or those immediate decades afterwards. I should note, though, it is made of local limestone near Lachish, which means that it was not an imported good. Whatever the surface they chose to write on came from that area. It was local, so the person who wrote it was at least local for a while. Now, what I want to point out is that both Gerar and Lachish have a related script the dating is controversial on both of them. Right now, it looks like the dating's about 400 years apart. I'm not going to say that's close, but the geography is interesting. And I should say that the script is also controversial, but the Luwian scholars do seem to feel confident that this is a relation to Luwian script, which is from Western Anatolia. So here's our lessons that I want you to pick up from this script. One, we have 2 inscriptions discovered with Western Anatolian script. In all of Canaan, 2 inscriptions. The geography is right in this region, the southern Canaan, southern Philistia, right on the border of the Amalekites, is exactly where it should be. The date is right for at least one of them, although dating is questionable for both. And then it should not bother you that there's only 2, because even the Philistines, as well documented as the Philistine presence is, yes, there's Philistine writing, but they did not write like we're used to. There's not these thousands upon thousands of writing samples. That we have a very small sample relative to the population. So if this is even a smaller population of people, it should not surprise you that there's not a lot of samples of their script. But what I really want to do is take a closer look at Lachish. Lachish is where all the surprises are. So let's jump into Lachish. Now, Lachish we've talked about before. This image should look familiar to you. By the way, this image takes place like 500 years after what I'm talking about tonight. Okay, but I talk about this in the Merneptah lecture when we talk about the oldest image of Jews. So this is a conversation piece in there. I just want to bring it up to remind you we've talked about the city before. The other 2 artifacts are closer to the period of time that we're talking about. Now, Lachish is an ancient city, goes back to Neolithic times. It would become a major Canaanite city eventually, but it was it was very close to Egypt. We see them talk, the rulers of Lachish talking to the Egyptians and the Amarna letters. It would be destroyed by fire in 1200 BCE, thereabouts. It'd be destroyed again around 1130 BCE. It'd be abandoned for 200 years, then rise as an Israelite city. Okay. What I really want to look at here are these 2 layers from the 1200s. Now, we have close ties to Egypt, which I established, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is this dating of 1200 BCE, Lachish being destroyed by fire. Why? Because there's no new people that came in. Lachish was built back pretty much immediately after this destruction, and who came back? The same people that were there before. The archaeological record shows the Canaanites just came back. Maybe there was a couple extra Egyptian artifacts, but basically the archaeology is pretty solid that just the same people came back after this destruction. That's a little bit odd, because what that would show you is that they were attacked more by raiders than they were by conquerors. There was no new conqueror that came in. This city was raided, burned to the ground. Whoever raided them left, and then the same people came back and rebuilt their city. Maybe they had further relations with Egypt to hopefully protect themselves from any further damage. But in 1130 BCE, once again, the city would be destroyed by fire, and it was a violent end. Women, children were killed. They found the bones. There was a toddler that looks like he was intentionally dismembered. So very nasty ending in 1130 BCE, and nasty enough that the residents didn't return. They were done. I want to show you one other thing about Lachish before I move on, though. Is this not amazing? So this is the actual Tel Lachish. This is the archaeological dig. So the city was up on top of this plateau. You can see the ramp here to get up. It's a beautiful picture, really beautiful. But anyway, let me get back to our task at hand. So we've looked at Lachish. We've looked at Gerar. Now there's one other city that's going to have a significant role with us tonight, and that is Ekron. And the reason I want to go to Ekron was a couple reasons, but the first reason is this odd destruction layer repeats itself in Ekron. You can see how close Ekron is to Lachish. So let's take a look at Ekron. So Ekron is also an ancient city. It would become part of the Philistine Pentapolis. So these were the 5 cities that formed Philistia. But long before that, it was a Canaanite city. In fact, a very significant Canaanite city, starting around 1600 BCE. But it was destroyed by fire in 1200 BCE. In 1130 BC, there was a significant change, not a violent change, but Philistines started moving into the area as Philistines kind of took control, and this area became Philistia. It would go on and appear in Judges. You can read the rest of the summary, but what I really want to focus on is this section right here. And so in 1200 BC, it was destroyed by fire, a violent end to the city. But what happened here is the same thing that happened at Lachish. The same people came back. The same people came and rebuilt their city. So there was not a new conqueror taking over in 1200 BCE. So everything was the same. I said in Lachish, there was maybe a couple artifacts of Egypt. In Ekron, there was maybe a couple artifacts of Anatolia or Cyprus, which I'll get to in a minute. But I want to point out again, you have this thing where you have no new residents coming in, which would show raiders, not a permanent conqueror. Now, the difference between Ekron and Lachish is in 1130 BCE or thereabouts, instead of a violent end, you have this huge influx of peaceful people. And we know exactly who these people were. They were Philistines. So you see all this Philistine culture suddenly enlarging the city with Philistine wear and Philistine building and Philistine artifacts. So it seems that these people got along. Maybe they wanted the Philistines there for further protection. But that's kind of so you kind of have you have this horrible ending in Lachish, but I guess we can kind of call it a happy ending in Ekron. So what are our lessons here from these dating layers? That's been my main focus the last couple slides. 1200 BCE, they both had a massive destruction layer. But 70 years later, or thereabouts, they both had a big change, but different changes. So Ekron had this peaceful influx of Philistine or Aegean people. Lachish was completely destroyed and no one returned until 200 years later when the Israelites settled it. So what seems to be is that there were these raiders who hit the cities really hard around 1200 BCE, but by 70 years later, they were either gone or they were no longer a threat. But who could it be? Well, that's why it's time for us to go to the pottery. So I'm going to try it again. I got a lot of compliments over our last little pottery exploration, so we'll see if I can make it entertaining. I know there's a lot of pictures here, but I'm going to make sense of it all. You should already see some similarities between them all as you glance at the pictures. So what are you looking at? This is called Anatolian grayware. Actually, it's got a bunch of different names. Okay, so the technical name right now, although they're fighting over what the technical name is, seems to be Northwestern Anatolian grayware. But it was also for a long time, even like write-ups in the 90s, still calls it Trojan grayware. And Schliemann, going back 100 years, seemed to like calling it the Minion grayware. Whatever. For us, we're just going to call it Anatolian grayware for tonight. Okay. So Anatolian grayware comes from the area of Troy. So in Western Anatolia, more specifically Northwestern Anatolia, but it started off in Troy, it spread to Western Anatolia, and then it spread around the Aegean and Crete and Cyprus and so on. It's local clays from the area of Troy, from Western Anatolia, and they're fired in a way that gives them this even gray color. Now, what helps me identify them, well, I guess it helps the experts too, is they like using these uniform straight lines and these wavy gray lines. So see the uniform straight lines and the wavy gray lines. Now, I focus a little more on the wavy gray lines because it really stands out more, right? You can see a lot of straight lines when you look at pottery. But the same style of wavy lines on each of these, you'll see even in this one complete one is even better. You can see all around the rim here, this wavy line. This is much later. This is, I told you, eventually the Lukka area would become Lycia. This actually is probably around 500 BCE, but notice now it's not incised. All these are incised. This is painted, but it's still that same line. I thought that was interesting. Anatolian grayware was not a luxury trade item. This is not like, you don't find this type of pottery in the ruins of palaces. This isn't something wealthy people were carrying around. It seems to be something that either traders or some soldiers, so soldier or trader, someone who's not the elite, who's moving around an area. This map gives you a little bit of a better idea and shows you where we're going to go next. So this red line gives you an idea of where this Anatolian grayware comes from. You can see that a lot of it ended up in Cyprus, okay? And then after Cyprus, what do we have here? We have Israel, all right? Now, this is, I'll use my little arrow here, that's better. Now, these three locations are gonna be very familiar to you. So what I wanna do is analyze this grayware, where it's been found in Israel and what it means to our Bronze Age collapse series. I'm gonna show you a couple different pots here. Now, one of these is from the area of Troy in Turkey, modern Turkey. The other is from near Haifa in modern Israel. Can you tell the difference? You probably can't because they're identical, which is amazing. But if you look, they both are this Anatolian grayware, yet one was found near Haifa and one was found in Western Anatolia, but it's like the exact same style. All right, I know that it's unfortunately the coloring of the picture is a little bit different, but it's amazing how much the two look alike. So now what I want to do is, now that you've seen there's a connection, I want to look at a few more of these connections. Let me just say, to put the slide together, I had to read so much. The sources you see listed here is just the tip of the iceberg. But I think because you see so many sources, you'll see how much research I had to do to put this together into one coherent story. So I hope it's entertaining for you. All right, let's look at Ekron. So Ekron was one of those cities with those odd destruction layers. And let's look at Lachish. Again, one of these cities with this odd destruction layer. Okay, this pottery here was dated to be somewhere in the 1100 to 1200, probably closer to 1200 BCE. All right, notice that Lachish was one of the places that had this linear script. Let me remind you, Lachish is one of the cities that mentions linear script. Both of these cities are mentioned as having that weird 70-year period. This grayware was dated to that 70-year period. Now, you'll say, okay, well, it's probably all over Israel, but it's not. This grayware is only in 3 locations in all of Israel. One is Ekron, we talked about a lot. One is Lachish, which we talked even more. And the other is Haifa. Now, you're going to say, Seth, you didn't talk about Haifa at all tonight. And I agree, I didn't. But let's go back to my last lecture when we talked about the Jeker people. Okay, so we talked about the Jeker people. Towards the end, I went through the origins, and I was moving kind of fast at that point. But what I pointed out was the Jeker people settled in Dor. Okay, Haifa's up here. The Jeker people settled in Dor, this area. All right. It is believed that the Jeker people, and I said some people thought that they were like the Shekelesh from Sicily, but I said that wasn't the majority view. What they're most likely equated to is the Tukri, which are people from Northwest Anatolia. Where in Northwest Anatolia? Where in Northwest Anatolia? Well, Troy. That's right. So the Tukri people are from right here, just south of Troy, which is right here in the middle of my red circle showing the Anatolian grayware. Where did they settle? They settled here in the area of Haifa. So doesn't it kind of make sense that the one other place you have this grayware would be where we know other Anatolians would have settled? Kind of all makes sense, right? Okay, so this is the last slide you saw. I'm going to summarize here what we've learned from this pottery, okay? So number 1, the Anatolian grayware matches are known and suspected Anatolian people in Canaan. What do I mean? I mean the 2 places where we know that we had, or that we believe we had the Jeker people and the Amalekites, both we've equated with Western Anatolians, both have this grayware. There's no grayware found outside these 2 areas, okay? Now, the grayware is not a desired trade item. So this is unlikely to be some big merchant coming in and bringing all his wares from Anatolia. It's not something you would sell. It's actually, in terms of quality, considered inferior to native Canaanite pottery. So you're not going to import this grayware when the stuff you make at home is better. The destruction layers in Lachish and Ekron match each other, the 70-year period, with this pottery. Haifa and Dor, the pottery looks to have been around a little bit longer, like maybe around 100 years. Well, isn't it amazing that the Jeker people were populating there a little bit longer? They were in around Dor for a little over 100 years, so it works. The gray ware, as I said, was found specifically, I want to kind of drop Dor because I'm confusing it. I want to say, so this gray ware is found in these layers, the 70-year layer with this weird destruction associated in Lachish and Ekron. So all this evidence points to the same conclusion, that Anatolian people were operating in and around Philistia for 70 years. Okay, let me say that again. Anatolian people were operating in and around southern Philistia or southern Canaan, however you want to put it, for some 70 years. So now I need to look at Anatolia. Is there any evidence in Western Turkey of the Aegeans or Western Anatolians operating in southern Canaan? Yes, but let me remind you, here's our slide again. It keeps coming back, it keeps coming back. Now, I just wanted to show you this again because this is kind of serving dual roles. I use it as my Egypt reference, but I'm also using it as my Cyprus reference. So here's your Eastern Mediterranean, we'll round up and say Aegean reference, putting the Lukka people active in the Eastern Mediterranean. But what I really want to do is come back here to Egyptian records, and then we're going to look at some Luvian records. So the Egyptian records, which you can see here in detail if you want to hear about any of these individual people. I did put the episode numbers here, but the Egyptian people give us clear documentary evidence that people from the Aegean and people from Anatolia were invading Egypt, right? And thanks to a couple other artifacts that we spoke about in previous lectures, this papyrus, the story of Wanamun, and also the onomasticon of Menopi, both these documents they're Egyptian documents telling us that sea peoples ended up settling in the land of Canaan. All right, they say long-term land of Canaan. Now I've got a fun document to talk about. This one's a little bit of an archaeological adventure. Fortunately, due to the time, I'm not going to go through every detail of it, but I need to tell you a little background of this Beyköy 2 document. I know none of you have ever heard of it before, and I'll be honest with you, until I started doing this research, I'd never heard of it either. But it's a big deal in the Luvian world. So it's a 29-meter long Luvian hieroglyphic inscription. Now, the actual inscribed stone is gone, doesn't exist anymore. The only thing left is drawings. So it was preserved by a Frenchman who made drawings in the late 1800s of it. Now it ended up in the estate of a Professor James Melhart. Now he was a character. He was considered one of the greatest Anatolian scholars of all times, but there's a couple odd things about Dr. Melhart. One is he was involved in several forgery cases. And there was one case, at least one case, of some artifacts disappearing that he may or may not have been involved in. So anything he did was looked at with skepticism after this, and rightfully so. Okay, so these documents he tried to publish in the 1970s and early 1980s for a variety of reasons. It never got published, and all the people who studied in the 1970s and early 80s are no longer with us. And it disappeared after 1989. So now it's resurfaced again because after Dr. Melhart died, he gave it to his son. He gave his entire archives to his son. His son now took the archives to some Luvian scholars, and this was one of the artifacts that was found, was these copies of this drawing. Now, is this a forgery? So there's, like I said, you think I thought I was junky when I said there were 4 Luvian scholars. Maybe there's a few more than that, but not much. The 2 most prominent Luvian scholars are Zenger and Woodhuizen, and they say it's legitimate. They kind of actually went back and forth, especially Zenger, but they've come back now and they think it's legitimate. I'm not going to get into the details. The basic argument was that Melhart didn't know the script well enough to fake something this big. It's huge. He would do something much smaller that uses some signs and expressions that were not known when it last disappeared in 1989. And it's really, they believe, just too many names to fake. Like, why are you going to fake like 100 names? I mean, you have 10 or 15 or something, but you know, when you get to like tens and hundreds, it seems like a little bit extreme for a fake document. That's the long and the short of it. You're not going to believe it, but I actually emailed Dr. Beyköy to ask him about it, and he responded to me. So this comes from him. This comes from the scholar himself, and you can see that in the reference here where I was exchanging emails with him. Okay, so what's the big deal of this document? About a third of the known Luwian hieroglyphics from the Bronze Age occur in this one document. So that's a huge archive just for learning the language. The date's very specific, and it dates to about 1190 to 1180 BCE, which completely nails our Sea Peoples period, our Bronze Age collapse period. The story that it's written, it's long enough that you really know what's going on. If someone wants to read it, I can send you a nice document where it's laid out. It actually takes place right after the Hittites empire had collapsed. So the Hittites up here are now, their empires collapsed, and Mira, that's right here, is now kind of taking control and seems to maybe be building their own little short-lived empire. It also has some Greek connections, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Most significant to us is it mentions Philistia and Ashkelon. So are we now looking at a document written about the Sea Peoples, but from the Luwian point of view, from the West Anatolian point of view? What does this mean to our lecture? So we have a list of conquered areas that mention, and Philistia is mentioned. I don't want to get into it too much tonight. There's actually a almost same, like a Palestine in Anatolia, and my general feeling is it's talking about that. So I'm going to ignore line 1. I don't think it helps us tonight, but it very, very, very clearly says that Mira, this country, invaded far south, and it established a fortress in Ashkelon near the border of Egypt. Again, Mira, these Western Anatolians invaded the area of Ashkelon, and that was the main city in the area, so it could be in the neighborhood, but invaded Ashkelon, and then it specifically adds near the border of Egypt. So we know exactly what they're talking about. Not only that, it mentions the leader of this expedition is a Prince Muxus, and he was, and that isn't that for those of us who keep Shabbos, isn't that a great name, Muxus? But Muxus was a noble from the same area as the Tukri. So this was that tribe that I said was the same as the Jeker people. So this is really interesting. You have this nobleman from where the Jeker people are from, leading an invasion of Philistia. It all kind of comes together, doesn't it? There's more to this story with this Prince Muxus. He actually is equated to Mopsus in Greek tradition, and Mopsus was written about by a 5th century Lydian. Where's Lydia? That's in Anatolia. So you have a Greek writer from the 5th century BCE, and he's writing about this Western Anatolian prince who invaded Ashkelon during a campaign against Egypt. It's amazing how, it's just absolutely amazing how it all comes together, isn't it? And by the way, I'm going to talk about our Prince Muxus in our next lecture. We're not actually done with him. He helps us a little bit more in the lecture after this one. So let me summarize what these Luwian records mean to us. We have Western Anatolians, according to their records, that were invading southern Canaan. But this was a military incursion. It does not list anything about a permanent settlement, no new kingdom, no colony. It was a military incursion. And it reinforces, really, it's not like the smoking gun, but it certainly reinforces what the archaeology has shown us, okay? So now I'm gonna start my summary here. We have the Lukka people in archaeology and Amalek in the Bible, all right? They both are violent raiders who repeatedly attack weak targets. Now, that doesn't mean so much, all right? But that's our start, okay? So that's kind of the baseline for these people. Now, when we look at the etymology of them, Amalek can actually be translated to mean Lukka people. So you take Lukka people, as I'm saying in English, and change it to Hebrew, you can say Amalek, okay, Amalek. What's really stands out, though, is these people specifically, these Lukka people, seem to always have people or men attached to their name, like no one else for some reason, which would make it make sense that all these different languages are calling them Lukka people or Lukka men. It's not such a surprise that the ancient Israelites could pick up that same way of referring to them. It's not such a big deal to use etymology because, like I said, a lot of these successfully named people first start off in the 1800s with them being named just because they're people, just because the names seem similar, using the same etymology we are tonight. Looking at the map, the archaeological record kind of leaves us this space between Philistia and Egypt. And maybe I should have had a longer map, but if Egypt starts down here and Philistia starts here, we do have a hole, right, that we don't really know what's going on. It's the Negev desert, okay, but it's on the coast. Something could be happening besides maybe a line of fortresses. And what do you know? Our biblical scholars put the Amalekites, just, I don't want to say by coincidence, but using the data they have, the text they have from the Bible, biblical scholars put the Amalekites in the same location where you have this hole in the map. Looking at the timing is great, right? We have the records of the Lukka people go there, and they've been operating in the area for a long time, but they became much more active in the mid-1300s around the Eastern Mediterranean, and they started fighting Egypt during the time of Ramses the Great and also Merneptah. And then we have the Luvians indicating afterwards, so after the Sea People's invasion, we had the Luvians saying that Western Anatolians did in fact invade Philistia. And I added a couple other dates here at the bottom to help you have reference. If you don't remember how we dated the Exodus and Merneptah facing the Israelites, I just put it there again to remind you. Now, what we believe to be the Luvian script, or the Luvian scholars, what the Luvian scholars believe to be a Luvian script is only found in 2 places in Israel. Both of these places are in the same area of activity we've been discussing tonight. It is not found, that script is not found anywhere else in Israel. Okay, the dating does complicate things a little bit, but I do just want to point out they're both in that southern Canaan around Philistia. Now we have our odd destruction layers. So in Lachish and Ekron, we seem to have these raiders who came in and wreaked havoc in 1200 BCE. But the local residents returned. So by the local residents returning, that tells us that, hey, you know what? These people didn't conquer whoever destroyed them, and they moved on, and the residents came back. Of course, the 1130 ending was different for both of them, but I want to point out that you have this 70-year span of oddity occurring in southern Canaan around Philistia, and within this 70-year span, we find our Anatolian grayware. So this is a distinctive pottery that we have in just the right place. We know it's native to Western Anatolia. It's only been found in 3 places in Israel, Ekron and Lachish, in our area of Philistia or southern Canaan near the Amalekites, and the other place is Haifa, near Haifa, which is the port town, near a port town that Jecker operated in. Again, geography is working great. So finally, we have our minimum records after the collapse. So we have 2 Egyptian records that are reminded of tonight that say that Sea People settled in Canaan. And then we have the Luvian records, this disputed document, but document that seems to show that the Western Anatolians did come into Philistia right at the right time. Okay, so we're calling this Seth's theory of Amalek. What really happened? Number 1, the Lukka were violent raiders in Anatolia without a kingdom. And not having a kingdom, they spread their hostilities around Anatolia and then spread their hostilities to the Eastern Mediterranean. By the 1200s BCE, they'd come in contact with the Egyptians during the Battle of Kadesh. They probably were serving as mercenaries for the Hittites, fighting against the Egyptians. Now, they did have history staying on because it's very close to where Byblos was, and they probably stayed in the area, or some of them stayed in the area. Maybe they continued serving as mercenaries, maybe some were merchants, but they were still operating after that was over. They would join up again with the massive Sea People invasion of Egypt during the time of Merneptah, but the Egyptians are going to throw these Sea People back. They're going to survive this attack, and they probably were pushed into Canaan around this time. Now we know Ramses III more specifically pushed these Sea Peoples into Canaan, but there's no reason some could not have been operating in there earlier during the earlier invasion. The Lukka probably didn't bring their families. We saw like the Peliset brought their families, but they were more operated like marauders. Okay, as the Talmud tells us, the Amalekites just happened upon the Israelites on their way out of Egypt, and that's very important. It happened upon them. This wasn't a planned attack. These are roaming marauders, like the Freikorps after World War I, the Germans who were on the Russian border, or if you prefer, during the 100-Year War, whenever there was a break in fighting, these mercenaries of the British would go around massacring the French countryside and abusing their people until the French king had to come out and fight them again. So this is all well known in history, unfortunately, because it doesn't have happy endings. So there was no mercenary work at this point in time until Ramses III. So between Merneptah and Ramses III, there was no mercenary work, which makes mercenaries even more vicious, like I just talked about the 100 Years' War. Then there was a violent invasion into Ashkelon, destroying Lachish and Ekron. Okay, and this was timed right around the Sea People's invasion that these two places were destroyed. But whoever destroyed them either was unable or unwilling to establish a permanent base. So the Amalekites could have very well been the ones destroying these people, but we know they didn't establish a kingdom there, or at least we don't have any evidence of it. Likewise, this is around the time they would have attacked the Israelites. We know it was a very brutal attack in the Bible, and that matches the brutal attack that Lachish and Ekron had to suffer as well. But the Lukka people, the Amalekites, whatever you want to call them, seem to be like a schoolyard bully. There's no record of them going and fighting the Egyptians again. They like to push around the little people, but they're not going to go take on Egypt. All right, that wouldn't be a good way for them to extend their mercenary contracts or their lives. But over time, the Philistines and the Israelites are going to increase in strength. They're going to increase in power. And by the way, other people move in like Edom and Moab, and it squeezes the Amalekites, all these powers with Egypt on one side and these new rising powers on the other side, pushes the Amalekites in this little space in the Negev. But the Amalekites would still have this like state claim in the Negev until King David's time, but they were never the same level of threat again after that. So that all sounds really good, but let me just say it's highly, highly speculative. So I'll be the first one to tell you it's highly speculative. But taken together, if you look at, say, 1200 to 1130 BCE, all this evidence we put together tonight sounds really good for this 70-year period. Obviously, it's a little bit more problematic when we're talking about carrying this all the way over to King David's time. And for that, we'd only be able to hope that archaeology can provide us more in the future. But I do think it's amazing how it all works, okay? So to conclude, it's just a theory, but we have raiders with similar names operating in similar places at a similar time, leaving similar traces. We have no home run in the evidence, but we have an abundance of circumstantial evidence taken from an abundance of directions that all bring us to the same conclusion. Maybe the greatest strength of this theory is that you can lose a couple of them and it doesn't die, right? If that Luvian document really is forged, it doesn't kill it. If that Luvian script that was found really isn't Luvian, or it really was dated to the 1600s, okay, that again doesn't kill it. You can have, we've gone from so many different directions that it gives it its own strength. Even if we have a lot of circumstantial evidence. We can hope for an answer. There very well can be an answer, because the Negev, as you can imagine, the Negev is not a high on the list for excavating, right? For abundance of reasons. And so in Israel, we need more people that want to excavate in the Negev. And then taking a look at Anatolia, taking a look at Turkey, the Turkish government is really big into the Hittites. They always want to excavate Hittite sites. There are literally hundreds of Luvian sites that have never been excavated in Western Turkey. So there's a lot of information in the ground that has not been discovered. So there very well could be more clues that are one day brought to fore. So this is Seth's theory of Amalek, that the Lukka people equals Amalek. Did we solve a biblical mystery tonight? I don't know, but it was a lot of fun trying. Our next lecture, we've got another one. Jewish Philistines. Is it possible that some of the Israelite tribes are actually sea peoples. That was a lot. I'm sure it was a lot to listen to. It was certainly a lot for me to say. I'm glad my voice hasn't given out on me. If you like what you saw, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you just want to help me out a little bit, it helps if you like the video. It helps even more if you share these videos with your friends. And finally, if you just want to know a little bit more, feel free to drop me an email at my Gmail and get on the weekly email list. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.